Is Grandpa behaving himself, Rachel? Sort of, Rachel replied, her voice laced with weariness. But he hurt his leg. Old people can be such a handful sometimes. I wish they'd think about how hard it is for those of us who must take care of them. Julie, that's not a kind thing to say, someone else said. It's fine, Rachel said with a sigh. He's already declining quite a bit. I can't deal with the stress that comes with taking care of the elderly. But you're more experienced, so you'll manage. A few days ago, Rachel's husband Jacob's grandfather, Adam, had fallen while working in the garden and injured his leg. Thankfully, it wasn't a severe injury, but considering he was 85 years old, they decided to have him rest in bed to ensure the injury didn't worsen. Unfortunately, Rachel's mother-in-law, Julie, refused to go near him, let alone help with his care. Rachel, a 34-year-old woman, had been married for 6 years and lived with her husband Jacob's family. Her husband had been her boss at the company where she started working 10 years ago. The company was originally founded by Jacob's grandfather. By the time Rachel joined, her father-in-law, Andrew, was already the president and her grandfather-in-law was the chairman. Despite his age, Grandpa Adam was still actively involved in managing the company's critical responsibilities. 3 years ago, when Grandpa Adam turned 85, he decided to step back from most of his public duties. Though he remained the chairman, he handed over the majority of his responsibilities to Andrew. You've worked hard all these years, Adam, her mother-in-law had said with a smile. Now it's time for you to relax and let Andrew handle the company matters. To Rachel, her words sounded more sarcastic than supportive. Rachel's grandfather-in-law, though a bit stubborn, was known to be a fair and kind person, respected by many. In contrast, her father-in-law seemed less mature and often came across as indecisive and unreliable, especially when compared to Grandpa Adam. He tended to follow whatever his wife said without much thought. Rachel never met her grandmother-in-law, as she had passed away before Rachel entered the family. Rachel and Jacob started dating when they worked together on the same product planning team. 5 years after she joined the company, Jacob, who led the team with energy and confidence, struck Rachel as reliable, though sometimes a bit too self-assured. Perhaps this trait stood out to Rachel because she had lost her father at a young age and was raised by her mother alone. Tragically, her mother also passed away due to illness 3 years ago, leaving Rachel without any immediate family other than her in-laws. Shortly after their marriage, Rachel's mother fell ill and needed care, adding more pressure to Rachel's already challenging life. I decided to quit my job to take care of my mother when she fell ill, Rachel explained. The fact that my husband's family didn't object was likely due to something Grandpa said. He said, "It's only natural to take care of the mother who raised you on her own. Don't worry, just focus on taking good care of her." Those words gave me the reassurance I needed, and thanks to Grandpa's support, I was able to stay by my mother's side every day for a whole year without worrying about money until she eventually passed away. Although my mother-in-law seemed a bit unhappy about my decision, I was incredibly grateful for Grandpa's understanding. However, things began to change after Grandpa handed over the company to her father-in-law. Rachel started to notice that everyone's attitudes towards Grandpa gradually shifted. They didn't seem to listen to his opinions as much, and it felt like they were treating him with less care and respect. At first, she thought maybe she was just imagining it, but the more she observed her mother-in-law and husband, the more convinced she became that they were being dismissive toward him. Her father-in-law, Andrew, didn't seem to take a strong stance either way. He acted indifferent, almost as if he was ignoring Grandpa now that he was practically retired. It felt like they were treating Grandpa as if he was no longer needed, and that made Rachel upset. One day, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Don't you think your attitude towards Grandpa is a bit cold?" she asked Julie. "And you too, Jacob," she added, turning to her husband. "So what if it is?" Julie replied dismissively. "Grandpa tries to talk to you, and you barely respond. You don't even try to help him," Rachel said, trying to make them see how they were acting. "I don't have time to deal with old people," Julie snapped back. "You can take care of Grandpa if you want to. You're the one with free time." "You don't have to talk like that," Rachel said, feeling frustrated. Quiet, Jacob added, clearly not interested in discussing it further. I'm tired from work. Don't bother me with unnecessary things. No matter what Rachel said, they wouldn't listen to her. Grandpa, on the other hand, never complained or said anything about how he was being treated. He just quietly accepted it. Now, Rachel was the only one in the house who talked to him. One day, Rachel approached Grandpa. The weather is nice today, Grandpa. Shall we go for a little walk outside? Your leg seems to be healing well, and I think it would be good for your rehabilitation. Thank you, he replied with a gentle smile. Let's go out for a bit. They went to a nearby park where several families were enjoying the day. Children were running around and playing. Grandpa watched the scene with a look of joy on his face. Andrew and Jacob used to enjoy times like that too, he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. I was so busy with work that I couldn't take care of the children much. Maybe that's why I didn't raise Andrew and Jacob properly, he added, almost as if he was talking to himself, his expression a bit sad. Hearing him say that made Rachel think about how everyone could be kinder to Grandpa. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't come up with a good idea. Then, out of the blue, her in-laws suggested building a new house for Grandpa. This house is over 53 years old, right? They said, as if the age of the house was the problem. The current layout of the house is inconvenient, and it's hard to use. Rather than pouring money into repairs, it would be better to build a new house in a more convenient location. A new house could be designed with Adam's needs in mind, especially since he's getting older. We were lucky that his last injury wasn't more serious, but we can't predict what might happen in the future. It makes sense to build a house that's barrier-free, so we won't have any issues if he ever needs special care. I see, someone suggested. We could even place Adam's room in the center of the house, so it's easy for everyone to take care of him. Yeah, that's not a bad idea, another agreed. So it's settled then, they concluded. Adam, as usual, offered to cover the cost. If it's a house for all of us, I'll handle the expenses. Just talk to Mr. James about the money, he said in his typical fashion. Thank you, her mother-in-law said with a smile. She seemed pleased, but to Rachel, it looked like they only flattered him when they wanted something, especially money. Despite her reservations, Rachel thought that if moving to a new house meant everyone would take better care of her grandfather-in-law, it would be a positive change. Mr. James, who was the company's in-house counsel and also managed her grandfather-in-law's assets, would handle the financial matters. Grandpa trusted him completely, as Mr. James had been with the family for nearly 34 years. He was 61 now, and from what Rachel had seen, he was an honest and caring person. Sometimes it felt like he was more of a son to Grandpa than his actual sons were. Knowing that Grandpa had someone like Mr. James looking out for him gave Rachel some peace of mind. Rachel wasn't kept in the loop about the details of the new house, but her mother-in-law seemed very excited. She, her father-in-law, and her husband spent a lot of time looking at interior design magazines and discussing various ideas. So it seemed like everything was going smoothly. Then something unexpected happened. They found out that her grandfather-in-law had a debt of $3,500,000. Wait, what's this about $3,500,000? Rachel exclaimed, taken aback by the amount. It turned out that her grandfather-in-law had co-signed a loan for a friend's company, but that company was now in trouble, and the debt had fallen on Grandpa's shoulders. Wait, they're not going to take the house that's under construction, are they? Rachel asked worriedly. Since the contract is already completed, and as Julie mentioned, the house is in the president's name, it's fine, her mother-in-law said, sounding relieved. Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad we did it my way, she added, clearly pleased with herself. Listening to their conversation, Rachel learned for the first time that the new house was actually in her father-in-law's name, even though her grandfather-in-law was the one paying for it. It seemed like exactly the kind of thing her mother-in-law would orchestrate. Rachel couldn't help but wonder why they didn't consider selling the house to help repay the debt. Hey, this debt is Adam's problem. It doesn't involve us or the company, right? Rachel asked, trying to understand the situation better. Well, it was signed in Adam's name, so we're all good. There's no problem, they assured her, dismissing any concerns. Rachel couldn't quite grasp what was so good about the situation, but since her grandfather-in-law didn't say anything during the conversation, she chose not to intervene either. After all, it wasn't something she could handle on her own. A few days later, Rachel began to notice a gradual change in Grandpa's behavior. One day, she asked him, "Grandpa, what would you like to eat for lunch?" "Who are you calling Grandpa?" he responded. "I'm only 53. You have no right to call me that." Rachel was taken aback. "Huh?" "Sorry, it's me, Rachel," she said, confused. It seemed like he was lost in thought at first. Rachel thought he was just distracted, but as this happened repeatedly, she started to feel uneasy. Then another incident occurred. "Julie, what are you doing?" "Where's my meal?" he demanded. "Grandpa, I'm Rachel. Julie is your daughter-in-law." "You already ate your meal earlier," she reminded him gently. "I didn't eat. Are you trying to starve me?" he snapped back. Rachel began to wonder if his condition was triggered by the stress of the $3,500,000 debt. It might have been a double shock for him, especially seeing that none of his family members were stepping up to help. Rachel tried to convince Grandpa to go to the hospital, but he adamantly refused. It seemed like he didn't want to admit the possibility of having dementia. Rachel didn't want to force him, but she felt completely helpless on her own. She turned to her husband for support, but he brushed it off, saying it had nothing to do with him. Her mother-in-law wasn't any help either, so Rachel approached her father-in-law as a last resort. "I've heard from Julie and Jacob that they think it might be dementia. Can you come with us to the hospital?" she asked him. "It's not that bad yet, right?" he replied, clearly concerned about appearing. "If we go to the hospital, people will find out my father has dementia." "There are good medications now that can slow the progression," Rachel suggested, hoping to change his mind. "Well, there's no need to rush. Let's watch him a little longer. Rachel is here, so they'll be fine, right?" he said dismissively. Rachel couldn't help but feel frustrated by their lack of concern. She felt like she couldn't rely on them at all. "Grandpa, let's go to the hospital and get you properly examined," she urged him again. "Who are you? Where are you planning to take me?" "You're up to no good," he retorted, clearly suspicious of her. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she saw how stubborn and unrecognizable her once kind grandfather-in-law had become. But instead of offering any support, her mother-in-law just laughed, seemingly amused by the situation. "Even if he was the chairman, it's over for him now," she remarked casually. "But now everything, even the company, is all Andrew's." "Julie, Grandpa isn't completely unaware. He's still listening to everything," Rachel pointed out, trying to make her see how heartless she was being. "He'll forget everything soon. He'll start wandering and drooling. Just thinking about it gives me chills." "He's nothing but a nuisance now," Julie replied coldly as if he no longer mattered. The more Rachel listened to them, the more she realized how alone Grandpa and she were in this situation. She couldn't stay quiet any longer. "How can you say that? Grandpa has worked hard for this family all his life," Rachel protested. Her mother-in-law's words made her both angry and sad. But then, to her surprise, Grandpa just smiled, as if he didn't understand the hurtful things she was saying. "See, this old man doesn't understand anything," Julie added with a laugh. Rachel was furious at her mother-in-law's callousness, but she held on to a faint hope that things might change once they moved into the new house. After all, it was a house Grandpa built for the family. Maybe then, they would show some gratitude and be kinder to him. Rachel couldn't completely let go of that hope. 3 months later, the new house was finally ready. For days leading up to the move, Rachel found herself packing up her in-laws' and husband's belongings, while her own and her father-in-law's things were mostly untouched. Whenever she tried to organize her stuff, they kept assigning her more tasks, leaving her no time to prepare. But Rachel told herself it would be okay. She could move the smaller items later since the old house wasn't going anywhere. On a moving day, after most of the belongings were transferred, Rachel went to call her father-in-law, but her husband stopped her. "You and Grandpa can stay here," he announced. "What?" Rachel asked, shocked by his words. "You can stay in this house. We don't need any extra baggage in the new house." In other words, you and Grandpa will live here from now on, he said, his tone cold. Oh, and I'll give you Grandpa's debt too. At least you can be a housekeeper, he added with a smirk. Then, without another word, he turned and called out to the others. Hey, let's go. Yeah, I'm coming, her mother-in-law replied. Good luck with all the debt repayment and taking care of Grandpa, she added cheerfully as they all left. Rachel stood there stunned for a while. She couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Were they abandoned? Not just her, but her grandfather-in-law too? It took some time for the reality to sink in because Rachel couldn't believe someone could be so heartless. How was she going to explain this to Grandpa? Slowly, Rachel made her way to the back room. She didn't mind caring for Grandpa, that had always been her intention. But this situation was different from anything she had imagined. As she approached, she noticed Grandpa sitting with his back to her. Sensing her presence, he turned around before Rachel could speak. Have they gone already? He asked, his expression completely different from what it had been just a few months ago. To be honest, he seemed like a different person. For a moment, Rachel wondered if a new symptom had emerged, but then, to her surprise, Grandpa smiled, and what he said next caught her completely off guard. As they were talking, Mr. James, the company's in-house counsel, walked in. Chairman, have you finished getting rid of the unnecessary stuff? He asked. Yes, it's all done, Grandpa replied calmly. Shall we go? Where are we going? Rachel stammered, still trying to process everything. Of course, to the new house, Grandpa said, and with that, they left the house together. Rachel was still living in the old house, guided by her grandfather-in-law, not fully understanding what was happening. Over the next month, her mother-in-law and husband bombarded her with countless phone calls. Her grandfather-in-law had decided he wouldn't entertain their calls anymore, but Rachel felt she had to answer her husband's call, especially since they were on the brink of a divorce. Hey, Rachel, is Grandpa with you? When I went to the old house, it was up for sale. It's not worth $3,500,000, so you can't repay the debt. Is that why you did this? Her husband accused, his tone sharp. What do you mean? Put Grandpa on the phone. Dad said he hadn't been able to reach him at all. That forgetful old man must have done something outrageous, he continued, clearly agitated. Rachel knew exactly what he was talking about, but she wanted to hear it from him. What happened? She asked. Grandpa sold the company's stocks to the executive director. Thanks to that, the executive director is now the largest shareholder. A shareholders' meeting and a board meeting were held, and Dad was dismissed as president. But the executive director is popular. Maybe Grandpa thought it was better to hand over the company to him. The executive director must have tricked that old man into selling the stocks. This is invalid, her husband fumed. You seem to be misunderstanding something, Rachel replied calmly. Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he's more clear-headed than before. What? Her husband sounded shocked. Up until the day they were supposed to move, Rachel truly believed her grandfather-in-law had dementia. But it turned out he suspected something from the moment her mother-in-law mentioned building a new house to live with him. So he came up with a plan. He pretended to have dementia to observe how her in-laws and husband would react. Just as he anticipated, they each revealed their true colors one by one. In the end, they left her grandfather-in-law and Rachel behind. Rachel struggled to hold back her laughter because everything unfolded exactly as Grandpa had expected. When she finally spoke to him about it, he said something that left her surprised, relieved, and a bit conflicted. To deceive your enemies, you must first deceive your allies, Grandpa chuckled. It turned out that he had been receiving regular updates on the company from the executive director and Mr. James. With Grandpa out of the picture, her father-in-law and husband had been doing whatever they pleased, acting self-righteous and completely ignoring the opinions of the employees. They often hosted lavish parties at the company's expense. Eventually, Grandpa handed over the company to her father-in-law, but he had serious concerns about the future. Seeing how things were going, he decided he couldn't trust his son with the company and chose to leave it in the hands of the executive director instead. When her husband asked about the $3,500,000 debt, Rachel calmly explained, "That's taken care of now." In reality, her grandfather-in-law had been a guarantor for a friend's debt, but he had personal assets that far exceeded that amount. However, Rachel deliberately left out this detail to prevent her mother-in-law and husband from targeting those assets. The friend in question was the son of a benefactor who had helped her father-in-law when he was young. Additionally, the land owned by this friend in the countryside was going to be developed into a resort, allowing him to sell it at a high price. Rachel continued to explain this to her husband. "You're kidding," he exclaimed in disbelief. "More importantly, are you guys okay?" Rachel asked, genuinely concerned. "We're not okay," her husband lamented. "Both my father and I were denounced by the company. What should we do now?" "Wait, what?" "There's also a mortgage on the house," Rachel revealed, dropping another bombshell. "What? What do you mean, a mortgage on the house?" Her husband was shocked. "Haven't you realized it yet?" "The money for the house should have been paid off by Grandpa," Rachel clarified. "But Andrew signed without checking everything. It just shows he didn't have the qualities of a president." "You've got to be kidding," her husband sighed, finally understanding the gravity of the situation. As a result, her in-laws lost the new house they had built because they couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments. Now they lived in an old apartment that was over 53 years old, struggling to repay the remaining loan. Despite their desperate attempts to contact Rachel, suggesting they all live together, it was no longer possible. Her grandfather-in-law, having retired from his chairman position, bought an old house in the countryside. "Rachel, you can live wherever you like now, freely. You don't have to worry about living expenses," he assured her. But Rachel chose to stay with him. "If I'm not in the way, please let me stay with you," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. His eyes filled with tears too. Thanks to Mr. James, the divorce was finalized, and legal steps were taken to exclude her former father-in-law and husband from any inheritance. Rachel became her grandfather-in-law's adopted daughter, and she vowed to take care of him for the rest of his life. Now, the two of them enjoyed peaceful days working in the fields together. "Dad, look at this radish. It's huge," Rachel exclaimed, cherishing these warm moments under the bright sunlight. "I wish for these days to continue, even if just for one more day."